Hey everybody, welcome to another Screenwriting Tips. My name is Tony D, and this is my little friend Joan. Come here, Joan. Say hi to the folks. Hello. We're here with a video about something very complicated, contracts. Okay? So, I am not a lawyer, and this is not really legal advice in the legal sense. I am just a screenwriter who has signed many contracts and freelance contracts and that kind of thing. So I've read them over and I kind of know what to expect, but I am not a lawyer. So take that into consideration when I'm giving you this advice. As always, these opinions are just my opinions. They're my videos, and you can take from them what you will. So, as I said in another video, I gotta get Joan's little harness off here so she can relax for the night. We just got back from a walk. What can you expect from the money? Well, most of my clients have very unrealistic expectations of what they're gonna get in terms of a screenplay. So let me bring them down to earth. Yes, there's big money in screenwriting if you're at the top tier and working for the studio. Those guys are in the Writers Guild of America West or the Writers Guild of America East, or their names are so huge they don't even need to be in the union. They get paid a fee, which is at minimum the union minimum. They get paid for any rewrites, anything they do. They get paid to be on the set to do rewrites. They get paid for each individual rewrite they do on the set. They get paid if they have to go on a promotional tour, if they're also the producer. I mean, they just get paid every single step of the way. They get royalties. If the movie's made into a TV show, they get some royalties of that, even though they may never work on the TV show. If there's merchandise or all kinds of things. If it's sold to Netflix, and it just rains money for the people in the studio system. That's why it's nearly impossible to get in. And that's why you'll probably never be in. That's not a slam against you and the quality of your work or anything like that, but the people at that level know people. And I have never seen such vicious fighting over anything that I've dealt with in my career than guys fighting over the credit to screenplays that I either wrote or I created the comic and it was going to be a screenplay based on it. I mean, these guys fight over it tooth and nail. They want that credit because it just rains money if you're a screenwriter and you're in the union. However, there are disadvantages to being in the union too. You can't work for less than the union minimums, or you need a special dispensation, you need like a special thing and whatever. But those guys, basically, the union's just like anything else. The people who are in the union don't really even need it. Sometimes some of the older guys, they stay in it because they can just get enough work to keep their medical insurance going. And for some guys, it works for that. But most of these guys are so rich, or they work so much anyway, the guild minimums, they were going to get that anyway. They were going to get more than that. So, this idea that the union protects writers, it sort of does. If you're lucky enough. I mean, you can be anointed. I mean, a director or a producer is really popular who loves your work and decides, man, we got to do this screenplay and I'm going to champion you against the studio, against other writers who I know, against, everybody screaming, no, don't use this guy, use somebody else, use a studio-approved guy, it makes your life easier. You can be anointed if you're lucky, but you probably won't be. And if you're definitely starting out, that's very unlikely to happen. So you have to lower your expectations a great deal. So when you're dealing with a contract, if you're in a union gig and you get a union contract, you're probably golden. If you get all that. Probably not going to happen. If you have an agent who is affiliated with one of the Writers Guild. An affiliated agent only takes 10%. That's an agent. Any agent who takes a penny more than 10% is not an agent. He's acting as a manager, and managers can take whatever they want. So if you're going to get an agent that's guild affiliated. Should you get an agent? Well, it's another whole discussion, but long story short, if you're not getting enough work that you need a guy to run through your contracts all the time, you probably don't need an agent. If you have a big deal that's coming up that's worth millions of dollars, then yes, you probably need an agent or a lawyer or both. Lawyers are good. You know, a good entertainment lawyer can definitely help you. But there's dangers in that too. I had a producer friend. She was dealing with a big name studio, one that plays hardball when they're looking to buy a franchise, or in this case, it was an animated cartoon. She was paying her entertainment attorney $500 an hour for the negotiations, and the studio knew that. So she would go into the negotiations and say, I would like A, B, and C. The studio would offer her X, Y, and Z. They would negotiate and then say, okay, well, let's come back in a week and sign the papers. Great. Came back in a week, and the contract still said, instead of A, B, C, it still said X, Y, Z. And the reason the studio kept doing that is they knew she didn't have a lot of money. So they kept bringing her back to the table because she would have to pay for her lawyer, and they were draining her of money. And meanwhile, she's in this negotiation and she's not working, and she lives in LA and it's very expensive to live there. So you can see where that's going. They're trying to put the pressure on her to lowball. That can happen. That's a good problem to have, because even if you get lowballed by a big name studio, you're still going to get some good money. But again, you should have these problems. What's probably going to happen is you're going to be dealing with somebody who's not anywhere near the union. Nowhere near. It's a low budget production, guys raising money on their own, and it's the Wild West. Anything goes. Unless they put a union contract down in front of you from the Writers Guild, it's probably going to be just some contract that some attorney drew up or that the producer drew up. You know, it's not that hard to draw up a contract if you keep it simple. My number one tip is never sign a contract you don't understand fully. Okay? If there's a clause in that contract you don't get, you better start doing some research, ask a lawyer friend, do whatever you have to do to understand that clause. Don't rely on the guy you're negotiating with to explain it to you, because he's going to say, hey, just sign it, it's standard boilerplate. No. You cannot trust those guys because they're the guys you're negotiating with. I'll give you an example. And this wasn't anything malicious, but I had a potential gig with a company up in North Jersey. It was to write some comedy for, I think it was like some kind of phone app. I don't exactly remember. Anyhow, it was a big company. They sent me a contract that their lawyers drew up, but it wasn't specifically written for a guy who writes comedy for apps. It was written for anybody who ever worked for the company ever. So, consequently, it had clauses in there that basically stated I couldn't work for anyone else for years after I worked for them, which was fine if you work in the telecommunications field, I guess, and you're getting paid six figures to, I don't know, invent cell phones or whatever. But I was going to work for these people for a few months for a few $100. And basically the clauses in those contracts could have messed me up for other freelancing work. Now, would they take me to court over it? No, probably not. But if by some magical moment I was freelancing for somebody else or freelancing for myself and stumbled upon a hit worth millions of dollars, haha, now suddenly those lawyers would go back and go, didn't we hire that guy? Oh yeah, he signed this contract. We own that. So you have to be very wary of any draconian clauses that cause you not to be able to work. Now, obviously, you're going to, standard contract words will say stuff like, it's a non-disclosure agreement. You can't talk about another client's work with other people. If you work on their script, you can't talk about it until, once the movie's made, then nobody really cares. But you don't talk about a client's project. Typically, you don't do that anyway, unless they're cool with it and they don't really care, or unless it's just being produced. Like, for instance, I worked on another app thing. It was called Chat Stories, and the stories took place in, Messenger, basically, back and forth between two characters. Those chat stories are out and they're published. You can download them. I believe the app's called Eavesdrop, and I've been paid for them, and I can tell people I worked on them. I have I have credits on it. It's not a ghostwriting thing. So that kind of stuff is fine. But when you're working on something, generally you keep it confidential for a client. So if the movie hasn't been produced, and if the movie never gets produced, you really shouldn't talk about it, because clients get paranoid. They're very precious about their ideas, and if it doesn't get made into a movie right away, God forbid something else gets made that's kind of similar. If you had anything to do with it, they're going to be knocking on your door. So just be cool and don't tell anybody. You got nothing to worry about. So the kinds of things you need to look for a contract. First off, look for simplicity. If you're only talking about a low budget movie that you're going to get paid a flat fee one time, that contract should be 1-2 pages, maybe 3. I mean, 3 is about the max. Once you start getting to 4 or 5, like, what the hell is this about? And when we say low budget in the world of screenwriting, we don't mean Hollywood low budget. Hollywood low budget is like 10 million and under. That's still a pretty big movie. That's basically, that's a good payday for a screenwriter. And you're probably going to have to be in the union to be on that. Once you get down to $1 million and under, that's when you're in a really low budget territory. The guys who, they got together some investors, maybe venture capitalists who just love movies, maybe just a bunch of knuckleheads who always wanted to be in a movie or go to a movie premiere, and they're holding the thing together with shoestrings, basically. Typically, a lot of guys, especially directors who are trying to make a name for themselves, will try to do what's called a micro budget movie at about 100K, 50 to 100K, maybe 200K. And they might get the thing just barely shot for that kind of money. I've heard even lower. El Mariachi is an example, legendary example. But it's not, when somebody says they shot a movie for $5,000, they didn't really. They really did spend other money, or they used other resources, or they had access to other resources. Like a lot of guys, if they work in a film development house where they develop film, if you're actually shooting on film, very few people do these days, that could help a lot. If you're working for a rental house and you're friends with the owner and he's letting you use the equipment on the off weekends that they don't have a rental because you're reliable, and he gives it to you for like next to nothing or for working for him. Ways like that, you can really cut the cost down. Sometimes there are guys who produce movies just because they're shooting commercials and they have all the equipment and they make money shooting commercials, and then they do a little movie on the side. So typically, what do you want to ask for? Money-wise, when you sit down to talk to a producer or a guy who's going to make a movie, the guys who know what they're doing, who are real, are going to talk money first conversation. Okay? They may even come out of the gate. You'll probably go into the meeting knowing what they want to pay, or at least having an excellent idea. Guys who are like fishing around, they're trying to feel you out to see what you'll take. My advice is don't take anything under 2% of the total budget. So at 100K for a total budget movie, that's $2K, $2,000. That would be my minimum for a screenplay. Anything less than that, you're getting into really tough territory. Because first off, some of these guys will come back to you a million times for rewrites, so you got to make it very clear, if you're getting paid very little, there's not going to be a million rewrites. I'll tweak it, I'll fix little things here and there, but you can't keep coming back to the well unless you come with money. Excuse me. So if the budget is $50,000, you're gonna have to tell the guy, hey, look, you gotta throw me $2K. Now maybe it's worth it to you for your first credit to just take the 1K, or even lower. And there's nothing wrong with that for your first credit. If you just need the credit, I get it. Believe me, I've been there. So yeah, you can take lower, but it's about standard 2%. 2%. So $100,000 budget, you're looking at $2 grand. $1 million budget, you're looking at 20 grand. That's about right for a screenplay. You should be paid like the professional you are. Now, producers at a low budget movie are going to try to sell you on taking what's called back end points. Okay, and there are net points and gross points. The points are percentages of the movie's profit. If you take net points, it is likely you will never see a dime, because that means the movie has to completely pay off everybody, and then anything left over is the net profit, and that gets divvied up by the amongst the people who have net points. Now you can find very honest producers who will pay everybody off and will do the math and give people net points. Those guys exist somewhere. I haven't met any of them. I'm sure they're wonderful people. I hope to meet them someday. But it's extremely likely you won't get it. If you get gross points, you have a shot at it. You're still likely you won't get anything from gross points, because gross points means if the movie costs $300,000 and it grosses $300,000, you're still getting your points, assuming the producer pays you. But here's how producers, especially low budget movies and sometimes big budget movies, can never pay you, and it's all perfectly legal unless you sue them and take them to court, which is going to cost you a fortune. What they'll do is they'll say, let's say the movie, they slap together a movie for $200K. All right? Now typically they're not going to show the movie in theaters and, make money that way. They're going to probably sell the movie outright to a distributor for at least $400K, right? So to make the movie at $200K, the producer, especially if it's his first movie, probably put himself out, right? He could have mortgaged his house, borrowed all kinds of money, borrowed all kinds of equipment, owes everybody and their brother money. So the moment 400K comes in when they sell the movie, that 200K evaporates immediately. So now he's got 200K left, right? But does he? He now goes back and he pays his investors, the people who gave him money or loaned him money based on whatever their deal was. So if he has investors that, let's say, gave him 150K, he's paid them back the money they invested. Now he pays them the profit. That's another 150K. Now he's left with 50K. But guess what? The other 50K came from him. He takes the money. Now it's all gone. If he made even more money, he might be doing some promotion. And in order to do that promotion, he pays himself. He pays some of the actors. And if you're lucky and you're in his crew, he might even pay you as the screenwriter to do some promotion. So that's the way people tend to get money doing promotion. But if he sold the movie outright, that ain't happening. Now, he may not sell the movie right away. He may shop it around to some local theaters, test it out, make a little money just charging, crowds, take it to film festivals, which also cost money. Every step of the way, there's cost involved. He starts saving those receipts. So when the movie's sold, he puts all that money back into his pocket. If he brings the actors with him, which he'll likely do, he pays them to come along. He pays their way, he pays their hotel room, he pays their food, he pays everything. So it's not totally unscrupulous for a producer to take all the money, because he put it all out and he spent it. And now he's got to get it back, and he did make the movie. Now, of course, if the movie's a wild, wild hit, and he ends up selling the damn thing for $1 million after, only spending like a couple of $100,000 making it, eventually he says, you know what, I'm going to pay everybody their points. If he's a scrupulous guy, he might just say, come and get me. In which case, then you got to make up your own mind whether you're going to sue the guy you worked with. Really, what people are doing in the world of low budget films is they're trying to make a name for themselves for the next deal. Okay, so if you work on a low budget film, let's say like the Blair Witch Project, and it's a huge hit, even though those guys probably didn't get a lot of money for the initial movie that they made, not as much as it grossed, certainly. It grossed a ton of money. They certainly got paid very well for the sequels, and I think they got a 3 or 4 picture deal after that. That's what people are looking for. They're looking for a hit. So then, in the next project, they negotiate themselves, a very, very sweet deal. At that point, then you get in a union, then you get a union deal, or you get a very sweet deal. Maybe you don't get in a union right away, but it's likely you would with a big hit, because at that point, Hollywood loves a hit, and they could say, from the director of The Blair Witch, new movie. And that's how people build their careers. And that's how you have to build your career. So when you're dealing with the low budget world, chances are you're dealing with guys who probably aren't going to have those hits. It's just the odds. It's not a slam against low budget guys. I've been involved with some low budget guys who are very, very good, and I thought they were great, but everything's working against you. The money, even some of the actors, the weather, the props, the timing, the unscrupulous distributors and producers who want to buy you out and steal everything. It's tough. It's a very tough business, and there's a reason why everybody wants to be in it for these millions of dollars, but there's a reason why only the top echelon people get those millions of dollars. Excuse me. So you have to be careful. So with a low budget contract, don't let the guy who's only paying you $2,000 go too nuts. All right? He can talk a big game and offer you points or whatever. I'm not saying refuse the points. I'm saying don't take the points in lieu of money. Okay? If he offers you $2,000 or $1,000 and 2 points, my advice is take the $2,000. Take the $2,000 and run. And you'll look back and go, oh, thank God I took the $2,000. But if he offers you $2,000 and 2 points, like right out the gate, and it's a $100,000 movie or lower, that's about right. I'd take that, sure. But if he's making $1 million picture and he offers you $2,000 and 2 points, tell him to go screw. Tell him to go pound sand. Tell him to cough up $20K, and stick his points. It also makes a difference whether or not they're buying a spec script from you, like you wrote a script and they're buying it from you, rather than you wrote a script for them. If you wrote a script from them, they feel that they have more ownership of it. And they do, technically. You're a hired hand. But if you're selling your vision, that's a little different. Now, don't get too precious. A lot of you out there are going, I got to protect myself. I got to protect myself from everybody. Don't get paranoid. You have to come up with prices in your head. What will you really sell this for? Seriously, you got to say to yourself, there's got to be a price where you're going to walk away, where you just say, okay, take it. Take it and give me my money and be good with it. And you should be good with it. Look, you signed a deal, you're a grown adult, just be good with it. If they go on to make them tens of millions of dollars with an idea you sold, don't be bitter about it. That's a good thing. You could still parlay that to your advantage. You could still walk around and tell people, yeah, I created that. They're going to assume you're a millionaire. But look, I work for the Simpsons comics. People assume I'm like rich or something. Oh my God, you work for the Simpsons comics? You must live in a mansion. No, I don't live in a mansion. I live with a little dog in a little house. Sometimes you make good money, sometimes you don't. You don't make big money unless you own it and you have a hit, which is extremely rare. Okay? So cool your jets. So if you're going to work on something and you're going to work on a contract, again, keep it simple. Show it to a lawyer friend, show it to an agent friend if you have one, show it to other people who are responsible and kind of know contracts, and don't sign anything you don't understand. That and come up with prices in mind and be cool with it, and just say to yourself, another thing I like in my contracts is a time limit. That is very important. I've learned over the years. So if you're hired to write a screenplay and there's a 3-month time limit that you can't possibly go over 3 months without getting more money, then good. I mean, you don't want to be endlessly rewriting, because there are people who will literally develop stuff to death. They'll develop things. The problem with it is this. This is probably a topic for another whole video. When you develop things, you're thinking about the ideas that go in your screenplay and the scenes and whatever. And over the course of a period of time, you may change some of them, which is fine. But there comes a point where you keep changing and keep changing it and change a character and do another rewrite. And then the movie becomes something else. I worked on a screenplay where I did no less than 13 or 14 drafts. It turned into 4 different movies. Literally 4 different movies. Now those movies were kind of similar. They definitely had the same characters, kind of. But the tone changed. Earlier it was a comedy. Later it was more of a drama. Later it was more of a dark drama. And, it was overdeveloped. There's a window of time, and you should nail that window. And that's sometimes why people in Hollywood, after they work with a writer for a few months or even a year, they say, okay, that's it. We got to get fresh eyes on this. Because it can definitely be overdeveloped. Now, some of that's the result of them changing the actors on the movie because they're big studio pictures and there's a lot of money involved, and they don't want to go into production until they're sure. I'll give you an example of a mini disaster. You remember the sequel to Aliens? I believe it was the second, or no, it was the third movie. Aliens 3, I guess it was called, The Resurrections, or whatever it was called. I think it was that movie. Anyhow, early drafts of the script, they were so hot to make the third Aliens movie, they started building the sets based on, I guess, a treatment. And the treatment had something like alien druids or druids in space. So they started to build the sets, and they started to make these ornate sets that were it was supposed to be a spaceship, but the spaceship was made out of wood. And they actually started building this stuff. I mean, it was made to look like wood, obviously. They actually started building this stuff until somebody finally walked onto the set and said, you can't make a spaceship out of wood. It makes no sense. It's not going to work. And so they had a bunch of issues. They had to go back for a rewrite. And, that's a way a studio may waste money in an attempt to save money. They attempted to save money by getting the sets, rushing the sets to build. And then it turned out, oh, wait, we can't have a wooden spaceship. And then they ended up changing the druids to something else. I think they changed them to prisoners or mental patients or something. And then originally it was going to be 3 alien monsters. It was going to be a gorilla, a cow, or a bull, and a dog. And that was going to be, because Alien 3 aliens. So that was going to be the thing. They were going to push the idea that aliens gestate inside a particular animal and gain some of the traits. So the bull alien had horns. The gorilla alien was like super strong, had big arms, and the dog alien was like super fast and had good nose stuff. So they ended up cutting the gorilla and the bull, from what I heard, and just the dog. I mean, this is what I read years ago, so don't quote me on it. Maybe it's all fictional, but I do remember seeing the action figures of the gorilla and bull alien. So lots of crazy things can happen. So when you're working on your movie there, I know you're just concerned about the story and the format and all these other things. It's kind of a pain in the ass to think about all this contract stuff, but you got to protect yourself. The main thing you want to protect, besides the money, is your credit. Your credit is what will get you the next job. Don't let some guy jam his name on there. And believe me, I've had that happen, and it sucks. So make sure in the contract there's a clause that you're going to get sole credit if you're the sole writer. Now, obviously, if you're hired by a producer and he came up with the idea, one of the things you could say to him is give him a story by credit, which is perfectly reasonable. You could say, hey boss, why don't you take the story by credit and I'll take the screenwriting credit. Obviously, if he feels he's inputted on the screenplay, and it's likely he will, the producer will probably share the screenwriting credit with you, which is probably nothing you can do about that. I said in a previous video, understand that the producer is your boss, and you got to be very, gingerly approaching him about this kind of stuff, because he's the guy who hires and fires you. The director, while not the boss, he often is very influential on the movie, so he's kind of above you in the hierarchy. Now, he's usually not above you if he hasn't been hired yet and you're still writing a screenplay. But once that screenplay is done, yes, he is. So that's why it pays to get your deal done as far ahead of time as possible, because it's much easier to ask for money and things that don't yet exist, than to ask for it once the screenplay is done and they don't need you. Finally, if you're in a situation where you have to work for a low amount of money for whatever reason, maybe they just don't have enough money, maybe they just don't have the budget or whatever, or it's your first, screenplay, you could always ask for other stuff. I mean, that's a way to get some kind of pay. So what could you ask for? Well, if you're an actor like me, you ask for a part in the movie. That can be a way to help shore up a little bit of your influence in the film, because the director can't be a total asshole to the actors, really. His job is to make the talent feel good. And if you're the writer and an actor, he's got a little bit of a problem. So now he can't totally dismiss you because he needs you for the set. Especially if, depending on where you are. Now, obviously if it's just a bit part and you're replaceable, that's one thing. But if you have an actual speaking role, that, plus you'll get paid, hopefully, in a low-budget movie. A lot of actors don't get paid, so keep that in mind. Definitely if you're one of the producers, if you're an associate producer or a producer, co-producer, if you brought money to the table for the financing, you should definitely be a producer. And then you can throw your weight around. Then you're the boss of the director. Because if you bring $50,000 to a $100,000 movie, hey buddy, you are at least co-producer. And you definitely get a say about what the director does and who the director even is. So that's a quick way to give yourself the power in a movie and protect your screenplay assets. But keep in mind that if you're producers, there's a whole lot of headaches to being a producer. And there's a whole bunch of legal stuff to get in the money, which is very complicated, which I don't fully understand. There's this whole thing, there's a whole complicated thing where you put money in what's called escrow. Look it up on the internet. I don't really fully understand it enough to explain it in this video. I'd have to refresh my memory to know every little piece of it. But basically, they put it in the bank, and you can't touch it until the movie is in production, and then it unlocks, and then it can only be spent on the movie. But producers are in charge of that. And their job during the production of the movie is to dole out the money until the movie's finished. And if you budgeted correctly, the movie will be finished. And if you screwed it up, you're in trouble. And then you got to make some hard choices. Do you borrow more money? Do you go back to your investors? Do you pony up your own dough? Oh, that's a tough place to be in. I've seen producers in that area, and believe me, it's tough. So it's not easy being a producer or a screenwriter or a director or anybody else in the movie. But, always stay polite, always stay professional, but get your contract up front, know what you're getting into, get your money up front. Usually in a screenplay, they do it in thirds or quarters. You get an upfront payment, you start work, you do the first act, you show the producer, hey, I got 30 pages here, he'll send you another check, and you proceed like that until it's done. Now, usually on the last, bit, when you got 90 some odd pages, then it's like, okay, you don't get the last check, but they'll say, okay, let's do some tweaks or whatever, and you'll do some tweaks. And you'll get it to the point, hopefully, that they're satisfied. Now, they may come back to you and say, oh, we need to rewrite a scene or whatever because whatever reason. At that point, you can hopefully negotiate a little more money, or you can just do it because you want to be a team player, but I would try to get paid. I mean, if you make it clear from the outset that, once the script is done, it's done. If they, move the movie from a submarine to a beach house and they need a total rewrite, you better get your money. Better get your money. Now, if they just want a couple of dialogue tweaks here and there, and it's not going to take you too long, it's only going to take you a couple hours, maybe you say to the producer, all right, I'll tell you what, he doesn't want to pay you. He can't because it's such a low budget movie. You say, tell you what, take me out to dinner. I'll bring the new draft of the script. We'll go out, we'll eat, we'll go to a nice place, and at least you get something out of it. I mean, that's the way I sometimes work it. At least I got a free meal. I once did a rewrite like that for a really good cheesesteak, and I have no regrets. Okay, so that's Screenwriting Tips. This is Little Joan, and I'm Tony D. Check me out on Patreon, as long as Patreon continues to operate. I think I'm going to be moving to Subscribestar soon, as soon as I can figure it out. And of course, the Webcomic Factory and Superfat, my comic sites. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time on Screenwriting Tips.